Yes, sir. Good afternoon, good afternoon, everybody. So, you're, as he said, halfway through the course. I'm really impressed by all of your energy, courage, and enthusiasm. And I always thank myself that I did my critical care 20 years back when there were no refresher courses of 5 days long. So, thankfully, we managed to get away with not doing so much. So, you can, as I said, I've said this before, you can always go to sleep in the middle of my lecture. When you wake up, I'm sure you will be more knowledgeable than when you went to sleep. And this is post-lunch, so I totally accept that, okay? Right. So, there has been a talk on ARDS by Dr. Govil, which looked at the pressures that you should look at. And there has been a talk on the other extreme of extracorporeal management. So my talk is somewhere in between the extracorporeal and looking at the pressures. So I'll be restricting myself more to lung recruitment maneuvers, PEEP titration, proning, and a little bit about HFOB and the evidence, the rationale of these and the evidence for it. So we have come a long way supposedly from the 52 years back when Ashborg and Petty described ARDS, defined ARDS, and serendipitously found the use of PEEP to be useful in this setting. And we have the Berlin definition. I'm not going to go into that, mild, moderate, and severe. The reason I'm just putting it here is that obviously the management for moderate and severe is different from that of mild. And I'll be talking mostly about obviously more refractory stuff, so more moderate and severe ARDS. The outcomes, unfortunately, in spite of our having defined ARDS and managed ARDS for so many years, still remains pretty high. And a quick look at the pathophysiologies to understand the rationale of whatever therapy that we use. All of you know normal alveoli, and in ARDS what happens is an inflammatory response which could be to infection, trauma, pancreatitis, burns, etc., leading to a release of cytokines, inflammatory cytokines, which makes like TNF alpha, interleukin 1, 6, other cytokines, leads to a leakiness of the endothelium, damage to the vascular and the alveolar endothelium. And also there is basically collection of proteinaceous material into the in the alveoli because of the chemokines that are present from the release of these cytokines. And these proteinaceous material lead to a loss of surfactant. So the alveoli tend to close on themselves, difficult to open them up. And that is the reason why we have a difficulty in oxygenating these patients, because the surfactant is lost, they don't open up easily. And also don't forget that there is endothelial damage, which also leads to a leakiness and more fluid coming into the alveoli. So all of you must have heard about the baby lung concept. Mid-80s, Gattinoni defined it. The importance of it is that it's a heterogeneous disease, and there are many diseased alveoli, but there are some alveoli which are actually normal, and these normal, supposedly normally compliant alveoli tend to be over-distended. These are called the baby lung, tend to be over-distended when we use what was considered as normal tidal volume. All this obviously you have gone through. What I'm going to look at is that what are the concerns when we ventilate patients of ARDS. One is what I said, the over-distension of alveoli. The normally compliant alveoli leads to strain or stretch, over-distension leading to volute trauma, and the strain is given by the ratio of the tidal volume to the FRC. And also the requirement, all of you know, of high inspiratory pressures to open up these alveoli leading to barotrauma. This is called stress. These go hand in hand together. But the other is the shear stress, and that is what probably is going to be my focus initially, is the shear stress or atelectrauma, where due to the cyclical opening and closing of closed alveoli and alveolar ducts, the shear forces are generated next to the closed alveoli, and these shear forces between alveoli, the walls of the alveoli, could reach up to 140 centimeters of water in spite of you having used the limited plateau pressure of 30 centimeters of water. So in spite of limiting the pressures, which would limit the volute trauma and the barotrauma, there could be shear stress because of these alveoli, completely closed alveoli opening up from a closed position, and the shearing of these alveoli. And that basically all these three traumas lead to release of more inflammatory cytokines which actually initiated the process of ARDS, called these cytokines, and this is called biotrauma, and all of these together would lead to VILI or ventilator induced lung injury. And this is what this shows. This review article is a must read, VILI in New England Journal of Medicine 2013. But what I want to emphasize is that not only does it cause damage to the alveoli, this cytokine release, they translocate across into the systemic circulation, leading to these cytokines leading to multi-organ dysfunction. And it has been found that patients in ARDS die not so much as of hypoxia, but because of ventilator-induced lung injury and the transmission of the cytokines into the systemic circulation, leading to multi-organ failure, possibly not directly related to hypoxemia. So VILI occurs at the two extremes of the respiratory cycle. On one hand, at the end of expiratory lung volume, that is the beginning of inspiration, where there is shear stress or atelectatic trauma, from where the alveoli opens from a completely closed position. And then upon reaching total lung capacity, that is at the end of inspiration, where you find volute trauma or barotrauma, all this leading to biotrauma, as we said. And protective ventilation strategies should aim at preventing both stress and strain at the end of inspiration and at the end of expiration. That is the target of ventilating a patient of ARDS. All of you know this study, the ARMA trial, 6 ml tidal volume. I'm not going to go into the 30 centimeters of plateau pressure, mortality benefit of nearly 9%, but also importantly, lower incidence of non-lung organ failure. Okay, that's what I told about the cytokine release. So if you have small tidal volumes, limit the plateau pressure, the non-lung organ failure is also reduced. Since then, there have been meta-analysis which has proved this, that low tidal volume is important. And I'm sure you know this. And so now the therapy is to use 4 to 6 ml tidal volume, not to cause volute trauma. To maintain minute ventilation, you have to keep the rate high, even going up to 30 or 35. And I'll come to little later towards the end that this may be also a problem. Permissive hypercapnia, allowing the CO2 to rise, again being questioned now. Maybe I'll mention it if I have the time. And limiting the plateau pressure to 30 centimeters of water. I'm sure Dr. Deepak Govil would have spoken about that. Now you use the limited tidal volume, limited plateau pressure, etc., and still the patient remains hypoxic. What all we can do? So one is recruitment maneuver. Recruitment is the opening up by increasing the airway pressures transiently. Transpulmonary pressures, you open up closed non-compliant alveoli once and make them participate in gas exchange. This is called functional recruitment. But in the process, you could cause overdistension of some of the other alveoli and cause vascular compression, the more compliant alveoli. This is called anatomical recruitment. Anatomical recruitment by itself is not of great benefit. Functional recruitment is what we are looking at. It is important to understand the difference, because this would tell us why certain studies have failed and certain in recruitment maneuver studies have failed. And you have to remember that the recruitment potential is highest in the early phase and in extrapulmonary ARDS. You will see that most of our viral pneumonias will not be benefited by recruitment maneuvers. And we'll see which are the patients which will be recruitable. And they will not be benefited because their disease is not just alveolar, but there's a strong element of interstitial disease in that. And recruitment maneuvers don't seem to open up the alveoli so well in this subset of patient. It's in the extrapulmonary ARDS, causes of ARDS, sepsis related, pancreatitis related, probably, which would be more recruitable. And post-recruitment, it is very important to titrate the PEEP post-recruitment, because you have opened up the alveoli, you don't want them to close back again, and that is why to prevent de-recruitment, you need to titrate the PEEP post-recruitment. That is as important a part of the whole process as recruitment maneuvers. And as you must have seen this slide many times, is that there are certain alveoli which are closed, like this lung is more recruitable at pressures. When you increase the pressure from 5 to 45 centimeter of water, it's recruitable, while these alveoli is not a recruitable lung, where there is not much recruitment in the change of pressure. How do you know which patient is recruitable? Okay, one is look at the hysteresis. Those patients who have a wider hysteresis usually are more amenable to recruitment. Those patients where increasing PEEP is decreasing the driving pressure or improving the compliance steadily are the ones who would be more recruitable. Okay, those are the recruitable. And then basically on this you could see basically a slope. A recruitment maneuver is change in slope in the inflation limb is sharper. That's sometimes very difficult to find. but high linear mid-range compliance. But the most easiest way to find is the loop. This one would be more recruitable than this one. If the PV loop of the patient is like this, they are more recruitable. What are the possible recruitment maneuvers we could use? 30 to 40 centimeters of CPAP for 30 to 40 seconds, pressure control breaths with a P high of 40 to 50 centimeters with PEEPs of 20 to 35 centimeters of water. Intermittent sighs, not use much. Large tidal volume breaths, not use much. Now there are these two methods which are for maximal recruitment strategies, and I'll come to that. So one is using very high pressures, and the Farlap method. These have been used in multiple trials now. Or you can use a CT scan, which has been used in some, to look at the recruitability of the lung. Before going for recruitment maneuvers, you have to have the patient hemodynamically relatively stable, low vasopressors or no vasopressors at all, fluid resuscitation, small fluid resuscitation if necessary. Surely check for pneumo and pneumothorax and pneumomediastinum before you go for it. Obviously, you are going to worsen it if they're already there if you do a recruitment maneuver with high pressures. Look at the saturations of the PO2s, the EtCO2, PaCO2, ABG, and look at the compliance. Adequately sedated, helpful to have muscle relaxant in this phase. And when you recruit, because you need to check these, because once you recruit, is it a successful recruitment will only be told to you by one, the compliance improving post-recruitment, the saturations improving, and the EtCO2 and the PaCO2 coming down, right? And the PaCO2, EtCO2 difference reducing. These are the signs of adequate or recruitment maneuvers working. The worry with recruitment maneuvers always has been that it causes hemodynamic instability, etc. But multiple studies have shown that the hemodynamic instability is very transient, and oxygenation surely improves. Multiple studies have shown that. Cardiac output reduces only briefly during the recruitment maneuver, but it comes right back after the recruitment maneuver. And recruitment maneuvers also, studies have shown that most of the recruitment takes place at around 30 centimeters, 35 centimeters of pressure, but there is a small subset of alveoli which don't open up even up to 40. That is why that 40 centimeters of CPAP for 40 seconds. And this is a CT scan of 5 of PEEP. The lungs is like that, CT scan. And at 20 PEEP and 15 driving pressure, the lungs open up. But still, they found that almost 22% of the area is collapsed, non-aerated. So these guys went up to very high plateau pressures and PEEP and found that the complete recruitment would happen when they were using plateau pressures of 55 and PEEPs of 25, 30. But do you see a problem with that? Over distension, right? And that has been a problem, and that is why these maximal recruitment strategies have been a problem, and we'll look at the evidence for that. And these are the maximal recruitment strategies where they increase the PEEP from whatever 20 to going up to 45 with a driving pressure of 15, maximum pressures of 60 to get full recruitment of the alveoli. The worry is over distension. The another method similar is called the Farlap method, almost similar, so step-by-step increase in the PEEP every 2 minutes, going up to a PEEP of 45 and a maximum pressure of 60. They cause the maximum amount of recruitment alveoli, but it can be counterproductive. So initial studies on these methods by Kekmerek, etc., showed that these recruitment maneuvers with titration of PEEP improved oxygenation, etc., but there was no difference in mortality. And basically improved oxygenation, driving pressure or compliance is the same thing. It's spoken in a different way, without detrimental effects on mortality, ventilator-free days or barotrauma. That's an interesting way to put it, right? So improved oxygenation and driving pressure without detrimental effects on mortality, ventilatory-free days. The ventilatory-free days were not less, but they were not more either, and there was not more barotrauma. Then there were multiple studies. So the meta-analysis of studies, whenever there are multiple studies which are not giving us clear-cut answers, there are meta-analysis. This meta-analysis, almost 10 trials, nearly 1600 patients. If you see the titration methods of recruitment maneuver, initially, earlier, before 2010, most of the recruitment maneuvers limited the pressures up to 40. But later, because of the studies, the CT scan studies, etc., they increased the PEEP and the total pressures much higher for complete recruitment. Individual studies did not show significant mortality benefit, but the meta-analysis of these studies showed that there was a trend towards better survival when recruitment maneuvers were used. There was not, higher barotrauma was not there, and the use of rescue therapies probably questionable, may or may not have increased. Okay, and this was a Cochrane review of the same, and they found that again recruitment maneuvers, 28-day mortality, ICU mortality, and in-hospital mortality tended to be less in those where recruitment maneuvers were used without increasing the incidence of barotrauma. And then once you have recruited, I'll come to the latest trial and recruit the ART trial. I'll discuss that in a little while. Before that, so once you have recruited, you want to stop de-recruitment and titrate the PEEP. There are multiple methods: the decremental titration, the incremental titration, the lower inflection point method, the ARDSNet table, the CT scan method, and the USG method. So the decremental titration of PEEP probably after a recruitment maneuver is the more appropriate one, because you have already reached a high positive pressure, and then you come down from a high positive pressure, you reduce the PEEP. One simple method is reduce the PEEP by 2 and look at the plateau pressure if you are on a volume control mode. If the the plateau pressure reduces by more than 2, then keep coming down on the PEEP. The point where reducing the PEEP by 2 reduces the plateau pressure by 2 or less, that means the PEEP just above that is the appropriate PEEP. Okay, so that's a decremental method. Incremental method is just the opposite. You keep increasing the PEEP by 2 and looking at, I'll come back to that. Incremental PEEP is increasing the PEEP by 2, looking at the plateau pressure in a volume control mode with the same volume. And if the plateau pressure increases by 2 or less, then you keep going up on the PEEP. The point where increasing the PEEP by 2 increases the plateau pressure by more than 3 or more than 2, and the compliance drops. That is the point. The PEEP just below that is probably the more appropriate PEEP. Okay. The lower inflection point method, you cannot do it on by yourself. It can only be done by certain ventilators which have a continuous low flow of gases. It's called the super syringe method or the Amato method. You look at the pressure volume loop and you cannot titrate. It's a misconception. You cannot titrate the lower inflection point by yourself. The ventilator does it. Only special ventilators have that continuous low flow, which can plot the graph for you and give you what is the LIP. Okay, right? So you can't do the LIP method on your own. You need the special ventilators for that. And then there is the ARDSNet table. The ARDSNet table, I don't use it. The reason is I believe that for different patients, you should titrate the PEEP depending on the disease process. If you use this ARDSNet table on a H1N1 viral pneumonia, you are surely going to cause barotrauma, because the FiO2 requirements in these patients is very high without requiring very high PEEP. If you use the kind of PEEP that is recommended for FiO2 of 1, you will surely have a barotrauma. So I personally, in the exams, if they ask you, you say yes, ARDSNet table can be used. I use if you have to. But as an intensivist, I believe that each patient's PEEP has to be titrated. It cannot be based on just a table where FiO2 and PEEP are linked. It is based on the compliance of that particular patient. Evidence will show you. I'll just come to that. Okay, so the whole idea is that you keep, by titrating open lung ventilation, recruit the alveoli, titrate the PEEP to stop de-recruitment and prevent over-distension. That's where you have to keep in the safe window. Individual trials which compared high versus low PEEP. Okay, that's the problem. It's high versus low PEEP. Is it appropriate PEEP? We don't know in these trials. Was it appropriate for that patient? So whenever the comparisons have been made, it has been high versus low PEEP on the ARDSNet table. When these were done, there was no difference in mortality between these two. So there was no, always said that high PEEP never helps. But is high PEEP appropriate for that patient? We don't know. Okay. So then when there is no benefit or no difference between in studies, so 3 major trials comparing high and low PEEP, alveoli, LUVS and express, then they do a meta-analysis, almost 2,300 patients. They found that probably better survival in moderate to severe ARDS in the higher PEEP group, only in the moderate to severe, not in the mild. And understandable. Why would high PEEP help in a mild ARDS? Less rescue therapies in the high PEEP group, but still I would suggest titrate your PEEP. Now the latest study, the ART trial, 120 ICUs, more than 1,000 patients. They compared, on one arm they had the lung recruitment maneuver and PEEP titration. So it was not high or low PEEP, PEEP titration according to the best compliance. And the other arm, control strategy of low PEEP of the ARDSNet table in patients of ARDS. The initial recruitment maneuvers used PEEPs of 45, driving pressure of 15, so total pressure of 60, which they later, halfway through the trial, they came down to 35 PEEP because they found that the mortality was getting higher in the 45 PEEP when they over-distended in the recruitment maneuver. So already they were in trouble in this trial. So what happened? Primary outcome, the mortality was higher in the recruitment maneuver and titrated PEEP, higher than the low PEEP. And also mortality from pneumothorax barotrauma was higher, and it's absolutely expected. Okay, but if you use such high pressures because you are over distending. The only thing was probably in the survivors, the ventilatory free days were more. And also interestingly, the higher mortality was also because the mortality was higher in the recruitment maneuver group, which had more FiO2, better PaO to FiO2 ratio. Those who did not require that high recruitment, when they got that high recruitment, died more. That's logical, isn't it? Right? And as we said, recruitment maneuvers are useful in extrapulmonary. Exactly. Pulmonary ARDS showed higher mortality when the recruitment maneuvers were used, because you are over distending these alveoli. Okay? And death was predominantly, the increase in death was because in that group, in the recruitment group, was more in the first 7 days. Early death, particularly because of barotrauma. Absolutely understandable. So there was a problem with the trial, how it was conducted. So they concluded there's an unfavorable balance probably, which they should have understood with using such high recruitment maneuvers, between potential positive effects in reduction of delta, but negative effects of over distension. Obviously, when you use recruitment maneuvers which go up to pressures of 60, there is going to be trouble. So probably, and this is the method of recruitment that they use, P high of 60, etc. So probably if you have to use, one is look at the recruitability of that patient, particular patient. Don't go by tables, okay? If it is recruitable, your increasing PEEP improves the compliance, reduces the driving pressure, that is probably the recruitable one. Use recruitment maneuvers, don't go beyond 35-40 pressures, it's of no extra benefit. It recruits good enough without causing over distension. Looking at the driving pressure, I'm sure Dr. Govil has looked into this. For me, what is important is, in my talk, is that what they found is that even with low tidal volume or limited plateau pressure, survival was better in those patients whose driving pressure cutoff was less than 14, right? But for me, this is the important graph. What they found is, with the same PEEP, those patients who had higher driving pressures died more. If the driving pressures were low, then the mortality was less. Driving pressure was high with the same PEEP, mortality was higher. When increasing the PEEP in the patients who had, when you increase the PEEP, the driving pressure remained not same with increasing PEEP. The mortality did not change. When you increase the PEEP and the driving pressure reduced by increasing PEEP, that means these were the recruitable ones, the mortality decreased. So it has to be appropriate titration of PEEP and recruitment maneuver. So there is no one size fit all. Okay. So that's the important part, and that's why I worry about the ARDSNet table. Okay. Proning, quickly. So proning, all of you know, Gattinoni and et al. His team was the one which really studied it. Coming to quickly understand this, what happens in proning based on two basic theories, shape matching and sponge theory. I'm sure you have read about this, but just to re-emphasize, it's based on the shape of our thoracic cage, right? And the sponge theory I'll come to. So our thoracic cage, all of you know, is more compliant, the cage is more compliant anteriorly and more rigid posteriorly. So when it's a diseased lung, these are collapsed alveoli at the bottom with ARDS, particularly because of the effect of gravity and the sponge theory. That means wet sponge collects water at the bottom. So the lung is a wet sponge, collects more fluid at the bottom, so it's more closed at the bottom, more distended anteriorly, and also preferentially the gas is flowing anteriorly for two reasons. One, mechanical breaths anteriorly, because also our chest wall is more compliant. So more easily gas flows anteriorly in a mechanically ventilated patient. In a spontaneously breathing patient, it's different, it goes lower. Okay, so there's a more over distension in the supine position of the anterior alveoli and less of the posterior. And when you prone the patient, what happens? So two things happen. One, when you're proning it, this wall, the thoracic cage anteriorly goes posterior, it's against the bed, its compliance reduces, the chest wall compliance reduces a little bit, so it does not allow over distension. And this is a rigid wall, the posterior is a rigid wall, right, which comes anteriorly now, that also does not allow too much over distension, but because of the sponge effect, the proteinaceous dense material from here starts trickling down anteriorly, so these alveoli open up. And there is a better VQ matching because the better lungs get the better perfusion based on gravity, and the weight of the heart is also taken off the left lower zone. And what is most interesting for me, this graph. If you look, this is called the gas to tissue ratio versus the lung height. What it means is this is in supine position and this is in prone position in an ARDS patient. Okay, sorry, this is supine position for normal lungs and supine position for ARDS lungs. If you see the ARDS lungs, there is a heterogeneity. Some areas are over distended and some areas are not opening up. When you prone the patient, what happens is, though these areas open up only little bit, actually these areas become less over distended. So you are actually reducing the over distension. What you are doing is, by proning the patient, you are making them more homogeneous. A homogeneously bad lung is better than a heterogeneously bad lung, and that's what you are doing by proning. You are reducing strain and over distension, and that is how this works. Okay, proning works. All right, so you reduce strain. So initial trials did not show mortality benefit, improvement in oxygenation, etc., etc. Meta-analysis showed that in the subset of patients who had severe ARDS, PaO to FiO2 ratio less than 100 or 150, there was a mortality benefit, and that is why the ProSAVR trial was devised, where they looked at patients with PaO to FiO2 ratio of less than 150, moderate to severe ARDS, and they did the proning early. And they did it for longer periods of time because studies had shown that those who were prone for longer did better. Okay, so, and they found, and it did early within 12 to 24 hours, and when they did that, there was a significant reduction in mortality. You should read this trial. Those of you who will be asked, like FNBs and IFCCMs, will be asked about trials. So the mortality difference was significant. Nearly the relative risk reduction was almost 45–50%, and ventilatory free days were more. This is a quick look at another trial which tells us the story of proning and use of PEEP. So this looked at just 24 patients. It's a brilliant trial to determine the effects of high PEEP and prone positioning on lung recruitment, cyclical recruitment, de-recruitment, that's the shear stress, hyperinflation or volute trauma, and how these effects are influenced by lung recruitability. 24 patients, small tidal volume, whole lung CT scans were held at breath holding pressures of 5, 15 and 45 centimeters of pressure of PEEP and 5 to 15 centimeters of PEEP in supine and prone position. They looked at lung recruitment, cyclical recruitment, de-recruitment and tidal hyperinflation. So what did they find? In the supine position, increasing PEEP decreased the non-aerated tissue. That means it increases the aerated tissue but also caused tidal hyperinflation. In the prone positioning, further there was decrease in non-aerated tissue. That means there was more recruitment happening, but also it reduced the tidal hyperinflation. That's what I spoke about, that it becomes more homogeneous, the lung. Okay, and cyclical recruitment and de-recruitment, the shear stress reduced only when a combination of high PEEP and proning was used. Then only the shear stress, which is another form of trauma to the lungs, causing bili, is reduced only by the combination of these. Okay. Now HFOV quickly. So basically it's a CPAP system. Piston displacement of gases, it's an active exhalation happens with the movement of the disc, and the rates are very high, small tidal volume. So it was supra lung protective ventilation, very small tidal volumes, less than anatomical dead space. Okay, but at rapid rates, and usually use lower pressures than CMB. How does gas exchange happen in this? First part is through convection, the rapid movement of gases. Directly there are some alveoli which get gas. And then there is some amount of convection and diffusion combination. The gas flow, interestingly, the inspiratory gas flow was found to be moving along the walls of the airways, while the expiratory gas flow was broader. So that you could have both inspiration and expiration with such fast rates, in spite of such fast rates. Okay, and then there was some amount of diffusion of gases between alveoli which caused the gas exchange. Okay, and the whole idea was to limit the pressures and keep the patient in the safe zone without increasing the pressures beyond that. So this was used as a rescue method, refractory hypoxemia. I won't go too much into the details. So what you start off with is start the settings at 5 Hertz, amplitude of 30, see if the patient's body wiggles, and it should start wiggling. That's what you see, the movement, till the groin. That is an adequate movement which is happening. That is adequate gas exchange will happen with that. And you monitor the oxygenation and the CO2. And EtCO2 doesn't work in this. The initial inspiratory setting is 1/3 of the inspiratory, 33% of the whole respiratory cycle time. If CO2 removal is inadequate, you actually increase the inspiratory time in this. The tidal volume increases by increasing the inspiratory time and increase basically tidal volume. So let us see at the evidence. Okay. So the evidence says that Oscillate trial and the Oscar trial. Oscillate trial showed higher mortality in HFOV versus conventional ventilation. The Oscar did not show any difference in mortality. And then multiple meta-analysis were done, which again showed the same thing. The latest one of 4 trials, individual patient meta-analysis showed there was not much mortality difference between the HFOV group and the non-HFOV group. Possibility of decreased mortality in patients with severe ARDS and increase the risk of barotrauma, probably HFOV, and the editorial said, I'm afraid this may very well be the end of HFOV and ARDS. Why did I speak about it? The reason is the idea of mechanical power or ergo trauma. Did anybody tell you about this? Yeah, a little bit? Somebody is nodding and somebody is saying so. Okay. So the whole concept very briefly is that for the lung, alveoli are a viscoelastic material. To open up the alveoli, you need energy, kinetic energy to open it up. It's like a loaded spring. When you use energy, the more energy you use for gas exchange, the more damage it will do. So the whole idea for nature is to use the least energy to do the most work. So how do you use more energy? So what happens in ARDS? Just basic understanding. Okay. So if there is heterogeneity of the lung that we saw, so some areas will require more energy, potential energy converted to kinetic energy to open up closed alveoli. You will require more energy to open it up, closed alveoli, right? If you over-distend an alveoli, there will be volute trauma. That also requires, when you overstretch a spring, like a spring, you are stretching the spring, you will require more energy to open up the spring. All these requires more energy. I won't go into the details of that. Why didn't HFOV work in spite of such protective tidal volumes? It induced, yes, high rate. High rate also, for every time you open up the alveoli, it requires energy. So if you have a very high rate, you are causing more ergo trauma. And that is why the concept of high rate, even in protective lung ventilation with small tidal volumes like 4 to 6 ml, going up to rates of 35 may be counterproductive. Okay, so the whole concept, and that is the basis of using extracorporeal systems. They are not working yet. Evidence is still against them, ECMO. I think it will be against them because ECMO itself is a very, what do I say, energy using mechanism which damages cells, release of cytokines themselves. There may be other methodologies. I'm not going to, because I've been told not to speak about those. Okay, so I'll not speak about those. Quickly looking at right heart failure in ARDS, studies found about 22% of patients have cor pulmonale with ARDS because of right heart failure. And in them, the use of nitric oxide. I was asked to speak a little about nitric oxide, which would reduce the right heart failure, improve upon it. Multiple studies showed improvement in oxygenation, no benefit in survival. This was a 9-trial meta-analysis. Again, no reduction in mortality even in severe or mild or moderate ARDS. So in conclusion, so titrate PEEP, okay. Consider recruitment maneuvers in a hypoxemic patient who continues to be hypoxemic in spite of your low tidal volume, limited plateau pressure. Titrate PEEP to reduce driving pressure. In those where increasing PEEP does not reduce driving pressure or improve compliance, don't use high PEEPs. Okay. Transpulmonary pressures, I think Dr. Deepak Govil spoke about it. Again, recent study 3 days back has come, no difference in mortality using transpulmonary pressure versus not. Using of neuromuscular blockade in the first 48 hours, yes, useful. I won't go into why, because I've been told not to speak about it. And prone positioning as early as possible. 12 hours, they say here. We use it now within the first 3 to 6 hours. If the requirement for PEEP remains above 10, 12, and the FiO2 requirement remains above 60, we go for early proning. Okay. And consider transfer to an extracorporeal life. So this is an article which has come, review article, just at the end of 2018. It's a beautiful article. Okay, support capable of medical center. Well, if you can give good quality, safe mechanical ventilation using the least amount of energy to open up the lung, that is as good at this present moment as extracorporeal therapies. Maybe CO2 removal methods may be of use, but again, not supposed to talk about that. Okay, right. All right. So, and nitric oxide probably in the subset of patients with elements of right heart failure with ARDS may be useful in oxygenation, not mortality benefit. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir.